The phone rang at 2 a.m. in the small apartment above Rossini's restaurant. Giuseppe Joe Rossini jolted awake, his wife Maria clutching his arm as he reached for the heavy black landline telephone. The voice on the other end was cold, professional, terrifying. "Mr. Rossini, you have 48 hours to accept our business partnership offer. This is your final notice." Joe's hands shook as he hung up the receiver. For 3 months, men in expensive suits had been visiting his family restaurant in Little Italy, insisting he needed their protection services for $500 a month. When Joe refused, strange things started happening. Broken windows, spoiled food deliveries, customers too scared to come in. But what Joe didn't know was that Frank Sinatra had been watching this entire situation unfold from his table by the window every Sunday for 2 months. And what Frank did next would turn a family's nightmare into the most inspiring performance of his career. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. March 10th, 1955. Lower East Side, Manhattan. Rossini's restaurant. Frank Sinatra sat at his usual corner table, picking at his veal parmigiana while watching the Rossini family struggle through another difficult evening. It was 7 p.m. on a Sunday, and the restaurant should have been packed. Instead, only 3 tables were occupied in the 40-seat dining room. Frank had discovered Rossini's 6 months earlier, drawn by the authentic Sicilian cooking that reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen in Hoboken. Joe Rossini was a master chef who'd immigrated from Palermo in 1948 with dreams of sharing his family recipes with America. His wife Maria waited tables while their 16-year-old son, Tony, helped in the kitchen. The restaurant had been thriving until December, when the business proposals started. Frank had witnessed one of these meetings from his corner table, 3 well-dressed men explaining to Joe why he needed their partnership to keep his restaurant safe from unfortunate incidents. Frank knew exactly what this was. He'd grown up around similar situations in Hoboken, where legitimate businesses were pressured into paying tribute to local organizations. But Frank had also learned something important over the years. Sometimes the best way to handle bullies was to make them realize they were picking the wrong fight. Tonight felt different. The restaurant was nearly empty, Joe looked exhausted, and Maria had been crying. 16-year-old Tony sat at the bar doing homework, occasionally glancing at his parents with worry that no teenager should have to carry. That's when the front door opened, and 3 men in dark coats walked in. Frank recognized them immediately, the same men who'd been negotiating with Joe for months. The leader, a thin man with gray hair and cold eyes, approached Joe at the cash register. "Mr. Rossini, I believe we had an appointment." Joe's voice was barely above a whisper. "Please, Mr. Davidson, not in front of my customers." Davidson glanced around the nearly empty restaurant with a smirk. "What customers? Looks like business is pretty slow these days." Frank set down his fork and paid attention. He couldn't hear everything, but he could see Joe's distress, Maria's tears, and Tony's clenched fists. "The offer has changed," Davidson said, loud enough for Frank to hear. "It's now $750 a month for our protection services. Price goes up when cooperation goes down." "I don't have that kind of money," Joe pleaded. "The restaurant barely makes enough to pay rent." "That's unfortunate, Mr. Rossini, because tomorrow morning the health inspector is going to find some very serious violations in your kitchen. And next week, there might be a small electrical fire. These old buildings, you know, very dangerous." Frank had heard enough. He stood up, walked to the cash register, and positioned himself right next to Davidson. "Excuse me," Frank said politely. "Could I get the check for table 7? Davidson turned, annoyed by the interruption. His expression changed when he recognized Frank Sinatra. "Well, well," Davidson said with mock friendliness. "The famous Frank Sinatra. Enjoying your dinner?" "Best Italian food in the city," Frank replied, looking directly at Joe. "I eat here every Sunday. Wouldn't miss it for the world." Frank pulled out his wallet, counted out $15 for an $8 meal, and handed it to Joe. "Keep the change, Joe, and save my table for next Sunday." The message was clear. Frank Sinatra wasn't going anywhere. Davidson's smile faded. "Mr. Sinatra, perhaps you'd like to find a different restaurant. This neighborhood can be unpredictable." Frank smiled back. "You know what, Mr. Davidson? I've been performing for some very important people lately. Federal judges, senators, law enforcement officials. Amazing how many friends you make in this business." Frank wasn't threatening anyone. He was simply stating facts. But the implication was unmistakable. "In fact," Frank continued, "I was just telling a friend at the FBI how much I love this restaurant. How it would be terrible if anything happened to such a wonderful family business." Davidson's face darkened, but he couldn't afford to escalate with Frank Sinatra. Too much attention, too many connections, too much risk. "This conversation isn't over, Mr. Rossini," Davidson said, then looked at Frank. "Enjoy your dinner, Mr. Sinatra." The three men left, but Frank knew they'd be back. Bullies always came back unless you gave them a reason not to. Frank walked over to Joe, who was shaking. "Joe, can we talk privately?" They went to the small office behind the kitchen. Joe's voice was broken. "Mr. Sinatra, I'm sorry you got involved. These men, they're not the kind of people you want to cross." "Joe, how long has this been going on?" 3 months. First they wanted $200 a month for protection. When I said no, strange things started happening. My supplier raised his prices suddenly. The health inspector found mysterious violations. Customers stopped coming." Frank nodded. He'd seen this pattern before. "Joe, I want to help, but I need you to trust me." "Mr. Sinatra, these people, they have connections. They can hurt my family." "So do I, Joe. Different connections. Better connections." Frank pulled out a business card and wrote a phone number on the back. "This is my friend Detective Michael O'Brien at the 14th Precinct. Call him tomorrow. Tell him everything. Tell him Frank Sinatra sent you." Frank handed Joe another card. "And this is my friend Tony Benedetto at the Times. He's a reporter who specializes in organized crime. He might be interested in writing about a restaurant that's being pressured by local racketeers." Joe's eyes widened. "You think this will help?" "Joe, these people survive on fear and secrecy. Take away both, and they have nothing." But Frank wasn't finished. "There's one more thing. Next Sunday, I'm going to do something special here. A private performance for my friends. Are you available for a dinner party?" The following Sunday, March 17th, 1955, Rossini's restaurant was packed for the first time in months. Frank had quietly invited 40 of his closest friends, including Detective O'Brien, reporter Tony Benedetto, federal judge Thomas Murphy, and several prominent Italian-American business leaders. Joe and Maria had spent the week preparing their finest dishes. Tony helped serve tables, beaming with pride as celebrities and important people filled his family's restaurant. At 9 p.m., Frank stood up and addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you about the Rossini family. Joe here came from Sicily with a dream to share authentic Italian cooking with America. For 6 months, this has been my favorite restaurant in New York City. Frank gestured toward Joe and Maria. But recently, some people have been trying to convince Joe that he needs their protection to stay in business. They've been very persuasive. Broken windows, mysterious health violations, scared customers. The room was dead silent. Everyone understood what Frank was describing. Now, I don't know about you, Frank continued, but I believe good people should be able to run honest businesses without fear. I believe America is supposed to be the place where hard work and good food matter more than intimidation. Frank walked to the small upright piano in the corner. Joe, this song is for you and your family, and for everyone here who believes in standing up for what's right. Frank began playing That's Life, but he changed some of the lyrics to fit the moment. That's life. That's what good people say. You're riding high in April, but some folks try to tear you down in May. But you know you're gonna survive it, 'cause you got the heart to live it. That's life. As Frank sang, he looked directly at Joe, giving him strength. Looked at Maria, reminding her that she wasn't alone. He looked at Tony, showing him what it meant to stand up for family. When Frank finished, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. Judge Murphy stood and shook Joe's hand. Detective O'Brien assured him of police protection. Reporter Benedetto promised to write about the restaurant's incredible food and welcoming atmosphere. Davidson and his associates never returned to Rossini's restaurant. The next morning, Tony Benedetto's article in the Times featured a glowing review of Rossini's, mentioning that Frank Sinatra had called it the best Italian food in America, and noting that local business leaders have pledged to ensure this family restaurant receives the community support it deserves. Within a week, Rossini's was booked solid for 2 months. The combination of Frank's endorsement, positive press, and visible community support had transformed the restaurant into one of New York's most sought-after dining destinations. But the real transformation was in the Rossini family. Joe stood taller, spoke with confidence, and greeted customers with genuine warmth instead of fear. Maria smiled again, proud to share her family's recipes with appreciative diners. Tony started talking about maybe becoming a chef like his father, inspired by how his family's courage had created something beautiful. 6 months later, Joe opened a second location in Brooklyn. A year later, he published a cookbook featuring Rossini family recipes. By 1960, there were 5 Rossini's restaurants across New York, all thriving, all representing the American dream that Joe had carried from Sicily. Frank continued eating at the original location every Sunday for the next 15 years. The corner table was permanently reserved for him with a small brass plaque that read, "Reserved for our friend Frank, who taught us that courage sounds like music." In 1970, when Joe's son Tony graduated from culinary school and took over the family business, Frank performed at the celebration dinner. He sang That's Life again, but this time it was pure celebration, a song about surviving challenges and building something lasting. When Frank Sinatra died in 1998, the Rossini family closed all their restaurants for one day in mourning. They held a memorial service at the original location, where hundreds of customers, friends, and community members gathered to remember the man who'd saved a family business and proved that sometimes the most important performance happens not on a stage, but in defense of what's right. Today, Rossini's restaurant still operates in Little Italy, now run by Joe's grandson. On the wall hangs a photo from that March night in 1955. Frank Sinatra at the piano, surrounded by the community that rallied to protect a family's dream. Under the photo is a quote from Joe Rossini's memoir. Frank Sinatra saved our restaurant, but more than that, he saved our faith in America. He showed us that when good people stand, together, bullies become powerless. The restaurant's menu still features Frank's favorite, the veal parmigiana he ordered every Sunday. And every March the 17th, they hold Courage Night, a dinner celebrating local heroes who stand up for what's right. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to know that courage doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it just requires showing up, speaking up, and standing up when it matters most. Have you ever witnessed someone stand up to intimidation? Let us know in the comments how ordinary people can make extraordinary differences in their communities.